Lines are blurred, rules are bent. It's a thought experiment.
And welcome back to another episode.
Today we are coming to you from Raleigh, North Carolina.
I'm Lila.
I'm Evelyn.
I'm Emily.
And I'm Amarachi.
Today we'll be talking about cloning, and stick around for a representative from the bioethics community who is here to share her thoughts.
So what is cloning? Well, cloning is, according to Britannica, the process of generating a genetically identical copy of a cell or organism, and it's been around for quite some time. Research first started all the way back in 1885 with artificial embryo twinning, which is making clones develop artificially within the womb. Eventually, more breakthroughs would come from this field, such as the first successful nuclear transfer in 1952, but cloning would only come into mainstream discussion with the birth of Dolly.
Who is Dolly, and why did she make cloning popular?
Well, to answer that, let me tell you a story. In a secluded laboratory all the way in Roslin Institute lay a single cell in a test tube, but this cell wasn't an ordinary cell. It was a cell made from somatic nuclear transfer, or SCNT. SCNT is a genetic engineering technique that involves removing the nucleus from an egg cell and replacing it with the nucleus from a somatic cell. The nucleus added in a nucleated egg makes a zygote, which simulates a real fertilized egg. In Dolly's case, the egg cell was from a Scottish black-faced sheep, and the somatic cell was taken from the mammary gland of the Finn Dorset sheep.
Wait, can I interrupt you for a second?
Of course.
If any listeners are confused about the cloning process, I just want to step in and clarify a few things about the sort of details regarding how genes actually work. So our DNA holds the instructions for building proteins, and gene expression is the process in which DNA is converted into proteins. Gene expression happens in two main steps: transcription and translation. In short, genetic information is copied using messenger RNA or mRNA, which is the transcription process, and then this mRNA is used to build proteins, which is the translation process. So not all proteins are needed at the same time, and our body has ways of regulating gene expression by deciding which gene should be active at any given time. Although sometimes this can go wrong, and changes can happen to DNA unintentionally, which can be extremely harmful to an organism.
Thanks for adding that context. I know we're talking about a little bit of a weird topic, so that extra clarification was really helpful. This clone cell would eventually develop into Dolly, the first successful mammal to ever be cloned. With this development, the question started to arise. If we could clone a mammal like Dolly, couldn't we hypothetically clone a human? And just like that, Dolly was pushed to the forefront of debates surrounding cloning and its implications.
Yeah, and since then, the subject of cloning has continued to be heavily discussed, and Dolly the sheep became a sort of part of pop culture. And the page that I found on all of this, and it's a page called Why Clone, and they propose ways that cloning is good and beneficial, but the problem that I'm seeing with this website is that it doesn't really talk about the biological issues or the bioethical issues that come with it. The article, it states a lot of good information, but it doesn't really consider all the sides of it. What do you guys think of?
I would argue that it makes sense for an article that's titled Why Clone to only talk about kind of the positive aspects of it, because that's just the focus of the article, how this could benefit society. And then maybe an article that was titled the drawbacks of cloning or the ethical implications of cloning, then that might focus more on what could go wrong.
But even if they're still obligated to talk about both the good and the bad, even if you are trying to talk about why we should clone, it seems a bit disingenuous to not talk about, at least even briefly mention some of the potential implications of doing that.
And they also made this theory, which I thought was actually really interesting, in that with stem cells, which build, maintain, and repair the body throughout our lives, that cloning a stem cell that is genetically identical to an individual could be used for medical purposes, such as growing whole organs like hearts or whatever the person may need. And there's also the idea of reviving extinct animals through preserved DNA, and all you would really need for that is a well-preserved source of DNA and a closely related species to work as a surrogate mother.
Yeah, and I can get into a lot more depth on what people or the public opinion is, but just for some clarity, there are two types of cloning that are very controversial: therapeutic cloning and reproductive cloning. So reproductive cloning is the most highly debated because it aims to create a genetically identical clone of an entire organism, which is so astonishing, making it really controversial. The issue that makes people question is the safety or the efficiency of the procedure, the psychological harm, potential of exploitation, loss of genetic diversity. I could go on and on, but people believe that it's violating principles of human dignity, freedom, and equality. So therapeutic cloning is also heavily critiqued as it focuses on creating genetically identical cells to treat diseases without creating a cloned person. Now, this can be very beneficial to treating Parkinson's disease or many other types, so it can be very helpful, but it raises ethical questions because the process includes the potential of creating cloned humans using human eggs and the destruction of embryos.
Well, kind of going off of what Emily's article was talking about that she mentioned earlier, cloning actually does have a lot of benefits to humans, and these benefits are discussed in the novel Never Let Me Go. Have you all read it?
Yeah.
I don't think so. I think I've heard of it though.
Okay, well, for those of you in the audience who don't know, the basic plot of the novel is that cloning revolutionized organ transplantation. Humans were cloned for organ harvesting, which directly addressed the issue of a lack of organ donors. This technology would be life-saving and would allow patients to receive organs that are perfectly matched to their DNA.
Well, that's a great point. Reproductive cloning would also provide options for people who are unable to conceive children naturally. Scientific research would be revolutionized by cloning technology, leading to breakthroughs in treatment and cures of diseases currently plaguing humanity.
I see both of your points, but I'm not really sure that it's worth the risk, considering that this technology could easily be exploited and used for harm. And the ethical implications of the creation of human clones are extremely important to consider, especially the human right aspects of the issue. It is widely debated whether clones should be treated fully as humans, and even if they are still at risk facing stigmas and struggles regarding their sense of self.
You know, I would agree with you, Emily. There are also natural risk and consequences to consider that sometimes come with cloning, leading cloned animals to have genetic mutations and abnormalities, which is connected to what Lila was talking about earlier with harmful changes to DNA. This technology being used on humans could also pose a threat to human rights due to the lack of safety.
Okay, point taken. No matter what your stance is on the topic, I think we can all agree that moving forward, policy should evolve as the cloning technology advances. So creating a full ban on cloning right now may be extreme, but it is most definitely important to impose strict rules and regulations on this technology to ensure that there are no human rights violations or unethical experimentation.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. I think that after everything we talked about, I think this would be a really great point to bring in our guest speaker. She can just bring us some expert knowledge and information about this topic and give us a better idea of where to go. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for being here.
Hello, thank you for having me. My name's Chinyere Precious Uchua, and as a first year human biology major, I find this topic very interesting. I'll start off with the definition and two types of cloning. Cloning is a biological process that creates a genetic copy of a cell, tissue, or organism. We have reproductive cloning, which is the production of a full human clone, and therapeutic cloning, which involves creating cloned embryos from which stem cells are harvested to grow organs or tissues. This is done by polymerase chain reaction, which is actually something I learned recently. And that process is just taking a particular DNA sequence of interest and amplifying it. So similar to cloning, it would be just producing a particular portion of the human DNA sequence that you would want to research or work with. Whenever I think of cloning, the first thing that comes to my mind are the HeLa cells. They were known as immortal because they replicated quickly and didn't die off immediately like other cells that had been intended for in vitro slash test tube information and research. They were indispensable in treatment research for diseases such as AIDS, Parkinson's disease, and cancer. Despite how revolutionary these cells were, neither their owner, Henrietta Lacks, who died of cervical cancer, nor her family received any form of compensation, which is a clear breach of human rights. Henrietta Lacks had gone to Johns Hopkins University Hospital to get treated for this unknown vaginal bleeding that she was having. It turned out that that was cervical cancer. It was claimed that she was treated, but she died that same year. Although before she died, the doctors in charge of treating her took some samples of her blood and conducted research on it, where they found that it had all these wonderful properties. At first, they shared it commercially for free to the entire scientific community for the sake of research, and then they started selling it more without like any original patent. They did all this without informing the deceased family and giving them any form of monetary compensation. In fact, the family didn't know that these cells were being replicated in such a way. The only thing they got was being called back to get some cell samples in order to confirm if specific breaches or crossovers between some of the cells that had been airborne where still the HeLa cells were not. So the family left the hospital that day simply wondering why they'd been called in for a checkup. It wasn't until the early 2000s, after much fighting, that the families got some form of undisclosed compensation from the people who had been distributing these cells. In the same light, I believe that any attempts of cloning should involve willing adults who are educated, knowledgeable on the issue, mentally stable, and not facing life-threatening situations. These adults should also be heavily compensated for or agreed on a compensated amount for their contributions to the medical field. I also think reproductive clones or clones made beyond the embryonic stage, which is basically the stage of cells when the egg is fertilized, because they could develop cognitive function, and creating a living being just to destroy them by removing the organs they need to survive simply seems wrong, at least to me. With all of that being said, cloning for harvesting seems like an incredible scientific that could expedite research, save lives, and heal degenerative diseases, just as long as we don't dehumanize or weaponize people because of it. Well, these are my thoughts on cloning for organ harvesting. Once again, thank you so much for having me and have a wonderful day.
Yeah, that was really interesting. I hope that you all in your classes had a better understanding of this whole process after hearing what she said. I think she brought up a lot of great points. And
as we've discussed before, human cloning could potentially bring a lot of harm to the cloned individual. So Lila mentioned earlier a very great book, Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. And I want to go into more depth of the plot. But it's a dystopian novel that explores the lives of clones raised for organ donation. So it follows the characters Ruth, Kathy, and Tommy through their love and friendship. So a specific moment that I want to bring to all of you that showcases the dehumanization of clones is, well, actually, I should provide more context. So they attend a seemingly normal boarding school called Hale Shum, and they are taken care of by guardians. So one specifically is called Miss Lucy, and she tells the children after she overhears them talking along the lines of, you'll never become grocery store owners or film stars. You'll never go to America. All of your future is determined for you. So she says all this because she believes that the children are being kept inside a bubble. They're really closed off from reality. So Miss Lucy, their guardian, she's extremely frustrated with them and about their futures being hidden. She believes that they must know. So I think it really brings out the fact that they're so innocent. They truly don't know anything. So that's the end of our thought experiment episode. Thank you so much for joining us in exploring the bioethical issue of cloning. I hope you learned a lot and are able to form your own opinion on the matter. See you later.
bye. Thank you for joining us.